You can sign as many contracts as you want, but you will never take our place.
Splat! The sound of frosting and sponge echoed like a gunshot across the gilded ballroom. Gasps followed, sharp and jagged as a perfectly frosted chocolate cake slid down the side of Maya Brooks's silk gown. The black CEO stood frozen, her dignified composure fractured only by the shock in her eyes. Across from her, Clarissa Davenport, heiress to a billion-dollar empire, smirked with the confidence of someone who believed money excused everything. She held the empty platter like a trophy, her voice slicing through the stunned silence. "You don't belong here," Clarissa sneered, her words dipped in venom. "No matter what contract you sign, you'll never be one of us." The crowd stiffened. Glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos blurred into statues, every guest trapped between disbelief and dread. No one dared move, not with the powerful Davenport family standing just yards away. Richard Davenport, Clarissa's father, watched from the edge of the gala floor, his jaw tight but unreadable. Maya's chest rose and fell in silence. She didn't wipe the cake from her dress. She didn't lower her gaze. Instead, she held her ground, her dark eyes fixed on the heiress who had just humiliated her in front of international investors, diplomats and media elites. The ballroom, dripping in chandeliers and crystal flutes, suddenly felt like a coliseum. Every spectator waiting to see whether Maya would bow or break. But Maya didn't bow. She stepped forward, slow and steady, the faintest tremor of frosting slipping from her gown to the marble floor. Her voice when it came was calm, but calm like a storm warning. "Clarissa," she said, each syllable deliberate. "You think tonight is about me embarrassing you? But tonight isn't about you. It never was." The words sent a murmur rippling through the crowd. Clarissa blinked, her smug grin faltering just for a second before she recovered. "Oh, please," she spat, tossing her blonde curls. "You think anyone in this room would choose you over me? This is my world. My family's money built it. Without us, you'd still be begging for a seat at the table." Maya let the insult hang in the air. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout or argue. She simply turned, her gaze sweeping the room, at the Japanese investors who had flown in for tonight's $4 billion partnership signing, at the politicians who smiled for cameras but whispered in corners, at the CEOs who knew how fragile alliances could be. And then she said it. "You're right about one thing, Clarissa. This is your world, but the question is, will anyone want to live in it with you?" The silence that followed was louder than the music that had been playing just moments before. From across the room, Richard Davenport shifted, his hand brushing over his cufflinks as though weighing the weight of decades. His daughter had expected his silence to mean protection, but the flicker in his eyes told a different story. Clarissa, sensing her control slipping, barked out a laugh. "Oh, don't act like you matter. You're a guest here. You were lucky enough to be invited. And now look at you, covered in frosting, lecturing me like a teacher at some public school." Her words, meant to wound, only sharpened Maya's resolve, because Maya had built everything she had from nothing. She had clawed her way through doors slammed in her face, fought for boardrooms where her voice was ignored until she made it impossible to ignore. And now, standing in this glittering hall with cake dripping down her gown, she realized something Clarissa never could. Dignity isn't bought. It's earned. She straightened, her voice strong enough now to fill every gilded corner of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya said, addressing the investors directly, "tonight was supposed to be about unity, about building something bigger than ourselves. But what you've just seen, what Clarissa Davenport has chosen to show you, is the truth of how she views people like me, people who don't look like her, people who don't come from her world of privilege." Her words were not just a defense, they were an indictment. And every pair of eyes in the ballroom turned from the heiress to the CEO, as if re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about power. Maya continued, unwavering. "You want to know why companies fail? It's not because of numbers or deals, it's because of arrogance. Because people like her believe they are untouchable." Clarissa scoffed, waving her jeweled hand. "Enough. Daddy, tell her she's finished." The words echoed, but Richard Davenport didn't move. His silence grew heavier, damning. Maya held Clarissa's gaze one last time before she turned. Not away, but forward. Toward the Kyoto delegation, the billion-dollar investors watching with expressions that had shifted from polite to outraged. She extended her frosting-stained hand. "Gentlemen," she said, her tone cutting with both grace and steel, "if you want to invest in a future built on respect and vision, I'm right here. If you'd rather invest in old money arrogance, well, you just saw what you'll get." The investors exchanged looks, and then with deliberate care, the leader of the Kyoto group stepped forward. He took Maya's cake-smeared hand and shook it firmly. The entire ballroom gasped, and in that single gesture, Clarissa's smirk shattered. The room had changed. What moments ago was a glittering celebration now felt like a battlefield. Lines drawn, loyalties tested, silence sharpened like a blade. Clarissa's painted smile twitched, a crack showing in the porcelain mask of her confidence. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. A few of her usual sycophants gave nervous chuckles, but even they looked uneasy. Nobody wanted to be seen siding with the woman who had just reduced a historic business gathering into a scandal. "Daddy," she hissed again, her voice trembling now. "Do something! This woman is embarrassing us!" Richard Davenport didn't answer. His silence was its own storm, and for the first time in her life, Clarissa realized it wasn't protecting her. Maya stood tall, frosting dripping from her gown like melted armor, every bit of her presence commanding attention. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to fight. The weight of her calm composure was enough to expose Clarissa's tantrum for what it was. A performance of entitlement unraveling before the world. But Clarissa wasn't finished. She clutched the edge of the dessert table, her manicured nails digging into linen as her desperation grew. "You people don't belong here," she spat, her voice shrill. "This is our world, our money, our power, our—" Her words cut short when one of the Japanese investors, Mr. Saito, lifted a hand. His voice was low, deliberate, and every head turned toward him. "Respect," he said in measured English, "is worth more than money." The ballroom froze again. Mr. Saito's words struck harder than the cake ever could. He didn't need to say more. The Kyoto delegation's position was suddenly clear. Clarissa's face burned red, but she tried to laugh it off, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. She's manipulating you all. Look at her, pretending to be a victim because she can't stand being in the presence of real wealth." But nobody laughed with her. Instead, whispers began to ripple, tiny waves swelling into something larger. Guests leaned into one another, murmuring about dignity, leadership, about how quickly fortunes could shift when arrogance replaced respect. Clarissa, sensing control slipping like sand through her fingers, turned on Maya one last time. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice lower now, venomous. "I'll make sure of it. You think shaking hands with some foreigners makes you powerful? You'll never beat me, never!" But Maya didn't even flinch. She looked at Clarissa as though she were already history. Then she stepped into the center of the ballroom, her presence pulling every gaze with her, and addressed not just the investors, but the entire audience. "Tonight was meant to seal a partnership worth $4 billion, she said, her voice carrying across the chandeliers. "But money means nothing if it's built on disrespect. I would rather walk away from this deal than tie myself to a family or a company that treats people as less than human." Gasps erupted. A woman in a gold gown clutched her pearls. A man in a navy tux muttered, "She's really going to walk away." Clarissa laughed, a brittle, broken laugh. "See, she admits it. She's running away because she knows she doesn't belong." But the laugh died in her throat when Mr. Saito stepped forward again, his delegation moving with him. He bowed respectfully to Maya. "You," he said firmly, "are the kind of leader we wish to work with. A leader with vision, with dignity. The deal stands, with you." The room exploded in murmurs. Investors, socialites, reporters. Everyone's heads turned, recording every second of the humiliation that had just shifted. Clarissa, who had stood so sure in her superiority, was suddenly the outcast in her own family's ballroom. And still, Richard Davenport had not moved. His silence was suffocating, heavier than gold, sharper than any scolding. Maya inclined her head toward the Kyoto delegation, gratitude in her eyes, but no hint of gloating. She knew better than anyone that respect wasn't a prize. It was the foundation of power. But Clarissa couldn't stand the loss. She stomped her heel against the marble floor, her face twisting in rage. "This isn't over!" "Daddy, tell them. Tell them she can't do this!" Finally, Richard Davenport stepped forward. The entire ballroom held its breath. Clarissa straightened instantly, relief flooding her face as though salvation had come at last. But when her father's voice cut through the room, it was not the lifeline she expected. Enough. The single word silenced even the orchestra. Clarissa froze, her mouth open, her expression flickering between disbelief and panic. Richard's eyes, cold and unyielding, locked on his daughter. "Do you realize what you've done tonight? Do you understand the consequences of humiliating a partner, of humiliating yourself in front of the world?" "Daddy, Silence. The word was final, a blade slicing through the air. Clarissa's protest died in her throat. And for the first time in her privileged, untouchable life, the heiress realized her father wasn't here to clean up her mess. He was here to end it. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Every chandelier crystal seemed to tremble, catching the light like frozen tears. The crowd stood suspended in disbelief. Guests, investors, servers clutching empty trays, all caught between the downfall of one heiress and the rise of a woman who had just rewritten the evening's script. Richard Davenport's sharp command of "enough" still lingered in the air like thunder after a storm. But it wasn't just a reprimand. It was a declaration, one that everyone present knew would echo long after the gala ended. Clarissa's face paled. For the first time, she realized there would be no shield of privilege, no whispered excuses crafted by family lawyers, no sweeping the scandal under a velvet rug. Her father's expression was granite, cold, resolute, unshakable. "Daddy, I was only—" she began, her voice a weak flutter. But Richard cut her off again. "You've shamed this family. You've jeopardized a $4 billion agreement. And worst of all, you've shown the world who you truly are." The words struck her harder than any physical blow. Clarissa's eyes widened, her lips trembling as her father, her iron fortress, her lifelong savior, spoke with finality she had never heard before. "Mr. Saito!" Richard turned, his tone shifting into one of deep respect. "On behalf of my family and Davenport Industries, I apologize. No guest, no partner, should ever be treated as Ms. Johnson has been tonight." The entire room exhaled, an audible gasp at the sight of Richard Davenport bowing his head ever so slightly toward Maya Johnson. The very woman his daughter had tried to humiliate. Clarissa choked on her words. You're taking her side?" "Over me?" Richard's gaze hardened. "Respect is not negotiable. If you cannot understand that, you will have no place in this company. Or this family's legacy." Clarissa stumbled back as though her knees might give way. Her hand gripped the nearest chair for balance, but her voice shrieked with desperation. "Daddy, you can't. I'm your daughter." But the ballroom knew it wasn't about blood anymore. It was about power, about dignity, about the weight of choices. And in that moment, Richard Davenport made his. Maya Johnson would walk away as the victor, while his daughter would be remembered for the scandal that ended everything. Maya, who had stood silently through the storm, finally spoke. Her words were measured, graceful, yet sharp enough to cut through Clarissa's final defenses. "I came tonight to sign an agreement that could change the future of two nations. Instead, I was reminded of something more important, that no deal is worth my integrity. You tried to humiliate me, Miss Davenport, but all you did was reveal yourself." The crowd erupted in whispers again. Some nodded, some smirked at Clarissa's downfall, others recorded discreetly, knowing this moment would flood tomorrow's headlines. Clarissa shook her head violently, her hair disheveled, her mask gone. "No, you can't do this!" "I'll fix it, Enough, Clarissa!" Richard's roar shook even the chandelier. "You are finished. Leave this hall before you humiliate yourself further." Her mouth fell open. The room swayed in her vision, her world crumbling beneath the weight of her father's words. For the first time in her privileged life, there was no escape, no saving grace. She was not the untouchable heiress anymore. She was the downfall of her own empire. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply turned to Mr. Saito, who was already extending his hand with unwavering respect. "Our partnership stands with you," he repeated firmly. Their handshake sealed the room's fate. A ripple of applause broke through the tension. Tentative at first, then swelling into thunder as guests, investors, and allies recognized what had just happened. The balance of power had shifted. Maya Johnson wasn't just the black CEO who had been humiliated with cake. She was the woman who, within minutes, had transformed humiliation into triumph, dismantled arrogance with grace, and won respect that money could never buy. Clarissa, trembling, stood at the edge of the ballroom as applause rang in her ears. Her eyes darted to her father one last time, pleading silently, but Richard wouldn't meet her gaze. He had turned his back on her, and that was the final humiliation. With shaking legs, mascara-streaked cheeks, and a ruined gown, Clarissa Davenport stumbled out of her own gala, her empire collapsing not with a whisper but with thunderous applause for the very woman she tried to destroy. Maya watched her go, not with pity but with understanding. She knew this wasn't just about a cake, a gala, or even a 4B deal. It was about history correcting itself, one public reckoning at a time. As the orchestra tentatively began to play again, and champagne glasses were lifted in cautious celebration, Maya whispered to herself, "Respect, always." And in that single word, she carried not just her victory, but a reminder to everyone watching that dignity, once claimed, can never be taken away. The gala never fully returned to its former glamour. Though the orchestra played again and the servers tried to circulate champagne flutes, a current of change rippled beneath the chandeliers. People were no longer watching the stage, the decorations, or the wine list. They were watching Maya Johnson. For years, she had walked into rooms where her success was questioned, her authority doubted, and her presence treated like an inconvenience. Tonight had been no different, at least at first. Clarissa Davenport had seen a target in her, another name she could drag through humiliation to inflate her own fragile superiority. But instead of breaking, Maya had turned the moment into a reckoning the world would remember. By the time Clarissa's heels clicked out of the ballroom in disgrace, reporters had already sent whispers to their editors. Phones buzzed across the tables. The headlines were practically writing themselves. Heiress publicly disgraced after attempting to humiliate black CEO. Davenport deal dead. $4 billion agreement collapses amid gala scandal. Maya Johnson turns humiliation into triumph. Maya stood by her table as investors and dignitaries approached her one by one. Hands extended, heads bowed slightly, smiles respectful rather than patronizing. The same people who had once dismissed her as a newcomer, who whispered that she didn't belong, were now treating her as the center of gravity. Mr. Saito remained at her side, his calm but firm presence sending a clear signal to everyone watching. Their partnership was intact, stronger than ever. "You handled that with grace," he told her softly, his accented voice steady. Most would have lashed out. "You stood taller," Maya smiled faintly. "Dignity is harder to build than any company, but it's worth protecting." Richard Davenport, meanwhile, remained seated at his family's table, head in his hands. For a man who had built empires, bought politicians, and commanded boardrooms, he suddenly looked very small. The investors who once clung to his every word now circled around Maya instead. His empire hadn't fallen overnight, but the cracks were spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. And the cause of it all? Not a rival corporation, not a failed merger, not a hostile takeover. It was his daughter's arrogance exposed for the world to see. Across the room, whispers of admiration grew. Guests recounted the moment Richard had sided against his daughter, the way Maya's words had sliced through the silence. The stunned look on Clarissa's face as the applause rose for the very woman she tried to crush. Maya excused herself for a moment, stepping toward the balcony that overlooked the glittering city skyline. For the first time that night, she breathed deeply. The night air cooled her skin, carrying away the remnants of humiliation and replacing it with quiet triumph. Her assistant joined her briefly, holding out a napkin to dab away the remnants of frosting still lingering on her dress. "You know this video is going viral already," she whispered. "Everyone's talking about you," Maya chuckled softly. "Let them. The world needed to see it." Inside, the gala continued, but Maya knew the night had already been decided. Clarissa Davenport's downfall would be the headline, but Maya's rise, her composure, her refusal to bow to arrogance, would be the story remembered long after. As she turned to rejoin the crowd, applause broke out once more. Not for the orchestra, not for the champagne toast, but for her. People stood, glasses raised in acknowledgement. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about respect, and respect, Maya thought, was more valuable than any billion-dollar deal. That night, as Blacktown cars lined up outside the Grand Hotel and guests departed into the glowing city, one truth became clear. Clarissa Davenport had lost her crown of privilege forever, and Maya Johnson had claimed something far greater. She walked away not just as a CEO, but as a symbol, a reminder that no amount of wealth, power, or arrogance could crush a spirit anchored in dignity. The deal was gone. The cake was gone. But the moment remained, a moment that would echo in every boardroom, every headline, every whispered conversation about the heiress who fell and the black CEO who rose. Maya's final words to herself that night, as her car door closed and the city lights reflected in her eyes, carried the weight of her victory. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And tonight it was mine.